And we're just going to dive into today's presentations. We're going to talk about FSMO roles, issued with free FSMO roles, what to do, how to do things to stop them. And we're also going to do a pretty big part of this presentation is going to be about recovery and restores of forest recovery, domain controller recovery, Sysvol recovery, and we're also going to take a look at a new favorite tool of mine. So let's just see if I can get this one. Okay. So let's start. As you all know by now, you have 5 FSMO roles, and they are the schema master, who updates the schema, domain naming master, which is addition and removal of domains, PDC Emulator, which is the domain master browser, is also responsible for replication to down-level domain controllers and password validation. So, we talked about that earlier, and it's also called PDC chaining. The read master, relative identifier, it handles the domain read allocation pool and moving domain objects. Infrastructure master is responsible for updating DNs and SIDs when objects with cross-domain reference are moved. So all this information is stored in Active Directory. There is an object called the primary role object that is associated with each FSMO role. The primary role object has an attribute, FSMO role owner, which contains a single value that identifies the domain controller that currently is assigned that FSMO role. Since every domain controller has its own copy of the directory, there is no guarantee that all domain controllers agree on the value of the FSMO role owner at any one time. And that's because due to latency in replication, different DCs will disagree for a time on who holds the role. To avoid problems, the 2 following conditions must be met. 2 domain controllers must not assume a role at the same time. A domain controller that assumes a role must contain an up-to-date replica of the role object. So let's take a little closer look at each of the FSMOs, and starting on top, the schema master. Just going to see if somebody wrote a message. No. The schema contains the master list of the attribute used to define the entire directory. And it's only the schema master that can perform updates to the schema. Schema updates then replicate from the schema master to all other domain controllers in the forest. You also need to know that whomever is the schema master on that specific replica, if you do an update to the schema, it will be, and it's okayed by that replica, it will be okay with all the other replicas and it would start replicating out. So if you had an issue and a specific replica that don't know who is the schema master, believes it is the schema master, for example, and you have done the same update on that replica, when they start to replicate with each other, you're going to have a schema conflict, and that's not a good thing. And then you need to do a forest recovery, which I will talk about later. Domain naming master. So when a new domain is added, the partitions container of the configuration naming context will be modified. This process is managed by the domain naming master. So the domain controller that has the domain naming master role is the only domain controller that can do the following: add new domains or application partitions to the forest. 2, remove existing domains or application partitions from the forest. And 3, add or remove cross-reference objects to or from external directories. Certain components of AD, like domain names, must be unique within the forest. The domain naming master achieves this by querying the global catalog server. And since Windows 2003, it can query a remote GC. There's no technical need for the domain naming master to be placed on a global catalog like it was in Windows 2000. Sorry. Infrastructure master. There's an interesting one. When an object on a domain controller references an object that is not on that domain controller, it represents that reference as a record containing the GUID, SID, SID if it's security principal, and also the DN of the object being referenced. If the referenced object moves, the DN will be changed. The SID changes if it moves to another domain, but the GUID remains the same. The infrastructure master for a domain periodically examines the references within its replica of the data to objects not held on that DC. It will query a global catalog server for current information about the distinguished name and SID of each reference object. If the information has changed, the infrastructure master makes the change in its local replica and also replicates the new values to other domain controllers within the domain. You shouldn't place the infrastructure master on the same computer as a global catalog if your forest contains multiple domains and not all domain controllers are GCs. If you do that, the reference will never be updated because it doesn't contain any reference to objects that it doesn't hold. But if all domain controllers in a domain are GCs, the infrastructure master can be placed on the same computer as a GC, even if you have a multi-domain environment, since there will be no phantoms. If you have a single domain forest, the placement doesn't matter in regards to phantoms and infrastructure work. So what is this phantom record? All references from one object to another are stored as the database identifier of the referenced object. If the referenced object does not exist, for example, a user account in one domain has a manager in a different domain, and the contacted server is not a global catalog, a so-called phantom is created as a record in the database, and the database identifier of that record is used. So a phantom record contains the GUID, SID, and the DN of the object that is being referenced. If a copy of the object named in the attribute exists in the local database, no phantom is needed. If the object is located in an external directory partition, the local database uses a phantom record. So let me try to give you an example. So if an object in domain A holds a reference to an object in domain B, a phantom for that object and its parent exists in domain A. If an object is renamed or deleted, the phantom that references this object will be deleted by the infrastructure master. PDC Emulator. The PDC Emulator advertises itself as a PDC to pre-Windows 2000 computers, and yes, there are pre-Windows 2000 computers out there even today. Only the PDC Emulator can service requests for pre-Windows 2000 workstations that require directory writes. PDCs running pre-Windows 2000 will synchronize changes from the PDC Emulator. If the Windows NT browser service is used, the PDC Emulator plays the role of domain master browser. Also, any NetBIOS program that issues netget DC name API must talk to the PDC Emulator, and there are a few of those applications still left out there. Even if there are no pre-Windows 2000 clients, the PDC Emulator have the following functions. One that we have talked about earlier, its password changes are replicated preferentially to the PDC Emulator. Authentication are forwarded to the PDC Emulator before a bad password failure is reported to the user. We know it as PDC chaining. Account lockouts are urgently replicated to the PDC Emulator. A connection to the PDC Emulator must be made before changes to domain-based DFS can be done. Changes to group policies will be directed to the PDC Emulator in preference to other domain controllers. So basically, if you open up group policy manager, or whatever it's called now, it will try to connect to the PDC Emulator unless you actively choose it to use another domain controller. Three other things. Its time synchronization service uses PDC emulators to synchronize clocks because of the Windows time hierarchy. The SD-prop, which is a security descriptor propagator process, runs on the PDC emulator. And lastly, almost all of the AD administrative tools automatically target PDC emulator when you raise the domain functional level. Read master. When a security principal is created, a SID is added as an attribute of it, as we talked about earlier. So the SID consists of two parts. The first part is the domain SID and the second part is the RID, which is relative ID, which is supplied by the DC creating the object. Since all objects in the domain uses domain SID as the first part, the RID must be unique for each object, and that's the only thing that makes a SID unique. So the RID master performs two functions. The RID master maintains a domain-wide pool of RIDs and allocates them when needed to each domain controller. So every domain controller in a domain has a pool of RIDs that it can use. When the number of unused RID in a domain controller's RID pool falls, I think it's below 80%, the domain controller will request an additional 500 RIDs from the RID master. The domain's RID master then removes RIDs from the domain's RID pool and assign them to the pool on the domain controller that's actually making the requests. When an object moves between domains, both DN and SID changes, but its unique ID object GUID remains the same. And it's only the RID master of a domain will be able to move an object out of its domain. This prevents creation of two objects in different domains having the same unique ID. And here are some things in all documentations and everywhere you can read. It always says that it contains a RID pool. That's not true, because the RID master don't actually maintain a pool of numbers. It maintains the highest value of the last range it allocated. When a new request is received, the process is as follows. It increments the value by 1 to establish the low value in the new RID pool, and then it adds 499 to establish the new maximum value. And it then sends these two values to the requesting domain controller. So that's how it's really working behind the scenes. Some general recommendations for FSMO placements, because I've heard a lot of different stories that you can't put them on together in certain cases and so on. So the official recommendation is place the RID and PDC emulator roles on the same domain controller. You have to have good communication from PDC to the RID master. Is desirable as down-level clients and applications target PDC, making it a large consumer of RIDs. It's also easier to keep track of FSMO roles if you cluster them on fewer machines. If the load on a primary PDC justifies a move, you place the RID and the PDC roles on separate domain controllers but in the same sites, and they have to be direct replication partners of each other. As a general rule, the infrastructure master should be located on a non-global catalog server that has a direct connection object to some GC in the forest, preferably in the same AD sites. And that's because the GC holds a partial replica of every object in the forest. The infrastructure master, if placed on a GC server, will never update anything because it does not contain any reference to objects that it does not hold. Two exceptions to the do not place infrastructure master on a global catalog server rule are, and listen carefully because there are many people who misinterpret this. If you have a single domain forest, in a forest that contains a single AD domain, there will be no phantoms. And so the infrastructure master has nothing to do. So you can place the infrastructure master on any domain controller in the domain. The other thing is, in a multi-domain forest where every DC holds the global catalog role. So if every DC in the whole forest holds the global catalog role, then there are still no phantoms because all the DCs know of every object in the forest. So once again, infrastructure master has nothing to do and can also be placed on any DC in the domain. At the forest level, the schema master and domain naming master roles should be placed on the same domain controller as they are rarely used and should be tightly controlled. My personal recommendation is to place all on the same hardware on the same domain controller, because it's not a big issue today unless you have a very, very big forest and domain. And big, I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds of thousands of objects and changes, like 50,000 changes per day and stuff like that. And hardware today, that's no problem. We have fast disks and RAM is not that expensive anymore. So, duplicate RID symptoms. We're going to talk about problems with FSMO roles. If the domain has multiple RID pool role owners, there is a potential issue that objects with duplicate SIDs could be created. The most common scenario that I've seen to duplicate SID is a system state restore on the RID master. Another situation that has been identified as a possible cause of allocation of duplicate RIDs is the relative ID master role has been seized while the original relative ID master is still operational but has been temporarily disconnected. And there's something you need to know about the MTDS util and when you seize FSMO roles. I know there's been a lot of documentation saying if you seize a role, the domain controller that used to have that role can never be brought back online. I know you probably heard it, at least in the earlier days, and that's not really 100% true. First of all, the process of seizing a role will start with trying to transfer it. It will only seize if the server trying to contact the former FSMO role owner is offline. And so if you use the seize command instead of transfer command, it will still try to transfer first. So let's say I have an issue. I need to create the new CEO user account right now, and the RID pool is down or something else. I need to create a new domain, whatever. But I have to do it right this second, and the domain naming master is offline. I seize the role, I create a domain, the other server that was down comes up who holds the FSMO roles. You don't need to worry that much because replications will make sure that there will be only one FSMO role. So if you have a good replication, it will sort it out for you because FSMO role owner attribute is also adheres to USNs and how the replication works, the whole process. The RID, if the one that holds the RID master role is offline and you seize the role to another computer, when it comes up, the old one would recognize there's been a change in the USN number. So unless you actually during that time create something on the former RID master, you would be okay because it will replicate and it will see that, oh, I've been moved, so I will move, no problem. So there are some scary scenarios out there that is really hard in reality to actually accomplish, and unless you have a sketchy replication. So, but if you have duplicate RIDs, the symptoms that you can read on the screen will occur, like user and computers can't log on, groups and objects will be deleted when accessed, and so on. And you can all read on that on the screen. So what should you do if you suspect you have duplicate RIDs? First of all, you have to do an inventory on all DCs and record the following values for each domain controller: RID FSMO, FSMO role owner attribute, RID next RID, RID allocation pool, start RID, end RID, RID master free space, which is derived from a value from the RID emulator that represents the beginning of next RID pool to be allocated in the domain. The value for RID master free space should be higher than the RID values for all other security principals in the domain. So you use the inventory list to verify the following: no RID pools overlap each other, no RID pools overlap RID master free space of the RID FSMO owner. The value for RID master free space on the RID FSMO is greater than any SID allocated to users, computers, or groups in the domain. If the value for read master free space value is found to be lower than any read present in the domain, increase this value to one number higher than the highest read in the domain. If one read pool overlaps another read pool or read master free space, it must be invalidated. And you have to know there's no background task to detect duplicate SIDs in AD. You have to use NTD's util to do that. And do not forget, distribution groups also have a SID. So you must take a look at the highest SID allocated to a distribution group as well. And I know that many people says that a distribution group doesn't have a SID, but it do. And if you look at them in ADC or something, you'll see that SID will be there. And the reason is when you create a group, during creation, you can select between a security group and distribution group. But after you created it, you have the opportunity to switch between the two. So it doesn't get a SID at creation time. You would not be able to switch the type of group. So don't forget distribution groups. Let's see. No questions. If the PDC emulator fails, it may require a fast response to keep the domain functioning at the client level. Down-level clients will be affected by the failure of the PDC emulator straight away. Problems will include the inability to change domain password and loss of browser information pertaining to domain resources. In an environment that actually includes mixed mode domains, I recommend that the alternate PDC is located in the same site for fast transfer. Infrastructure master failures. Temporary loss of domains infrastructure master is not visible to end user, and it's not visible to admins unless a large number of accounts have recently been moved or renamed. When admins rename or move a member of a group, and that member resides in a different domain from the group may temporarily appear not to contain that member. You've probably seen this in the past. You take up the properties of the group or look at members, and you only see SIDs. That would be one example. So the infrastructure master of the group's domain is responsible for updating the group so it knows the new name or location of the member. Other FSMO failures. Temporary loss of the schema master, domain naming master, or read master is usually not visible to end users, but may interfere with admin tasks. Therefore, this problem needs to be addressed depending on different factors. If an extremely long outage of the domain controller holding one of these roles is expected, that role could be transferred to another domain controller. So if you expect maintenance or whatever, transfer the FSMO roles and create a script to do all of them for you. If you don't have it, email me or on Yammer and I have those things ready for you. But what I want to say is that don't be scared about FSMO issues. The only one that you really need to have under watch or monitor is the PDC emulator because of passwords and stuff, because that will affect your day-to-day business. The other ones, well, how many domains do you create before lunch? Not that many, I guess. So domain naming and so on, they are not really, they are really important, but they're not really important from a day-to-day perspective and user perspective. Monitor all of them, keep them on the same server, have a script ready to move them to another server, and you should be fine. And remind me on Yammer, and I have a pretty good script you can use. So if I see some issues, and this is one of the top FSMO issues I see, and that's the PDC gets too much load. And that is basically you have application that query the PDC emulators directly. The PDC is in a wrong site or whatever. And it can be overloaded. So what you need to do is apply PDC load reduction techniques. So let's take a little reason why. Because AD domains are much larger than NT4 predecessors. And yes, NT4 and 9x clients still deployed and targeted PDCs only for updates. 2000 XP clients use Windows 2000, 2003 DCs in mixed mode domains. And this one is the culprit. Older applications select PDC rather than any DC. Applications may enumerate the whole domain. If you remember, like NT4 user manager and server manager, if you start a user manager, you get everything. If you start a server manager, you got every computer. And the result will be the PDC gets more load. So how do we actually fix this or see the symptoms? The first is high CPU utilization for a long period, greater than 70%. High average disk queue, which means the disk queue is larger than the number of spindles, SSDs. Timeout of requests. When you do a password change, it takes a long time. So how do I optimize my PDC? Well, optimize hardware and software, hide PDC from DNS clients, implement WINS optimizations, block down level enumeration, and PDC in a dummy site. So let's look what that really means. Well, optimize hardware, that's an easy one. Bigger is better, less is just, yeah, you know. And today, when we use virtualization more and more, this becomes less and less of an issue, but it's still out there. Load reduction techniques in DNS. Well, first of all, you can lower the PDC service priority. That means you reduce the chance of DC-aware clients to select PDC before any other DCs. So basically you say, when a client wants to talk to a domain controller, I give the PDC a lower priority so it steps down in the list, so to say. The other one is to create the PDC only sites. So the clients, when they are trying to talk to the domain controller, it will talk to the PDC as a last resort. This is pretty much like DNS mnemonics. So basically, you say the PDC is available, but it will be the last thing you will use, or I will let you use. The other one you should always do is to disable out-of-site coverage on the PDC. Out-of-site coverage basically means if there is a site with no domain controller, you don't want the PDC emulator to actually be announcing itself as a local domain controller in that site. If you still use WINS, we have some techniques there as well. We all know that down-level clients locate DCs through 1C queries, and a PDC emulator always is on top of that list. So you can remove the PDC from top of the list by changing your reg number, which add 1B to 1C queries, and 0 is disabled and 1 is enabled, so you actually disable that one. Then you can add use another registry hack, and that's to randomize the 1C list for general load balancing. So that would basically be kind of like a round robin thing. So you don't get the same list every time we randomize it for you. Block enumeration. So non-application use SAM APIs to enumerate the entire domain. I here say old applications, and yes, they're old in the sense of the programmer who wrote it is probably 60 plus years. That's what I basically mean. It uses old ways of writing code. So when, let's say you have an application that wants to get information from AD, it actually uses the SAM API, and then it gets everything back from AD, and then it starts sorting it locally instead of actually using proper calls and proper LDAP queries and so on and so forth. This is really hard to control, because in order to find out which application is doing what, you need to increase the level of what AD actually gives you an event viewer by default. You can actually get the field engineering level up to 4, and you will get the exact query, for example, an application is doing. And that will give you a lot of information, so it's really hard to figure out. So there is something we can do. We can block unauthorized user from seeing more than 100 objects per call. So there is an registry So, in the registry there's something Sam do extend enumeration access check equals 1. So before, when the application is actually asking for information on ID, you can set an ACL and say, hey, I only give you 100 objects per call. That's fine. That's good for our PDC emulator, and it's really good for us. It's really bad for the application because next time it asks, unless there is some logic built into the actual application, which it's probably not because it uses SAM APIs, it will get the first 100 whatever objects AD you think it should have. So that application probably never gets through whole AD. In really bad situations, use that. And continues on server application. Another thing is some monitoring softwares are actually creating changes in the directory by agents. So there are monitoring software that actually creates and deletes accounts, grant accounts rights in the domain to see if AD is up and running. There are better ways to do that. And also remember that this also affects the application, because if I create and delete things on a DC, it will replicate that, for example, changes in policies and so on and so forth. So I say demand application update or toss it out. If you see applications that are doing this to your environment or domain controllers, demand an application update from the software vendor, or you just say, well, I'm gonna talk to some of your competitors because from a DC perspective, your application sucks. Sorry, but that's the reality. Recover and restore. So let's go through forest recovery. So we have to think about a situation where you never want to be and you never want to end up in. And trust me, from experience, it's not a fun thing. I've done this for Microsoft on multiple occasions. Somebody do something to the schema that prevents standard applications from installing. What I mean by that is if you do have applications to update the schema, make sure the have what do you call it? Oh, what do you call it? There is an authority on the internet that you can register your schema update so it doesn't conflict with other applications. I know, Lasse, you probably know it. Maybe you can write it in the text, in the message field.
No, I can't because I forgot the name as well.
OIDs, I think it is. Lasse will probably find it during this presentation. We had a discussion with some people in Houston about it, me and Lasse. So make sure if you have an application to update the schema, make sure it have registered its schema updates correctly. So, for example, the next time you want to update your Exchange or next version of Exchange, it will update the schema. And you have an application that you've written yourself, for example, and Exchange then wants to use or want to actually add the same attribute names, you will have a conflict and that will be no good. And the most common thing, malicious admins do some harm to your schema that will actually break it. It's not that hard. And so I said, this has happened. And when it happens, it's too late to start reading up on it. You should do it right now. And there is actually another thing that will require forest recovery, which I never seen it. Yes, that's my official point and sticking to it. I never seen it in real life, but if you deplete your read pool, that means you can no longer create objects in your forest. The only way out is to go back in time, do a restore of the forest, make sure you have enough reads to create TDOs, that is trusted domain objects, so you can trust another domain and then start migrating. So how do you do a forest recovery? First of all, at the beginning of the line, you have introduced your first domain controller, and then, time goes on, you make changes, and even small changes like a password change. That's also a change. You do backup regularly, and something happens. Something really bad happens, and you know, okay, I'm into forest recovery now. I have no way out of this. So you need to identify the root cause, and the root cause might not be the latest backup. It might be some old backup. You might realize, oh, this application broke my forest, and it took us 2 months to find out because we then needed to update Exchange. So the closest backup to the identified root cause needs to be used. That means you change all your changes from the backup you use to today, those are lost. If you are really unlucky, there's gone 6 months or 8 months. There's a lot of information lost. So what you need to do, high-level steps, it's from a pure domain controller perspective, this is not hard. Basically, you shut down all domain controllers. In each domain, restore one DC from a good backup tape, clean all the DC metadata, reinstall OSS and all other domain controllers, re-promote all the other domain controllers, and you start with the root domain first. So what has happened is something breaks our forest, shut down all the DCs, I restore one DC per domain off network, and the reason will come soon. I disable the GC service, I will break replication, I will cease the FSMO roles, and I will increase the read master by 100,000 or 200,000. I will bring the restore DCs back on the network. I will enable GC on at least one root DC. I'll reinstall OS on all other DCs. Promote all other DCs. Enable GC server as needed. I will move the FSMOs as needed. So those steps aren't hard. Think about how many times we take up a new test domain or whatever. We've done this many, many times. The problem with forest recovery is everything but the domain controllers. Because think of having to do this, you have Exchange, you have SharePoint, you have Dynamics, you know, all of your application. This is what makes forest recovery hard. It's every surrounding thing. And so basically the first thing on your forest recovery checklist should be a list of phone numbers and names of application owners that will be affected, and have a contingency plan how to find them or a replacement. Bring them all into the office, or if not, on a link phone call, and start doing it step by step. Because if my forest is recovered, trust me, if Lasse is the Exchange admin in my forest, I need to wake him up because he needs to do stuff with Exchange. I can't do this without changes to Exchange or any other applications. Lasse, do you have any comments?
No, but it's true. You have to do stuff when you messing around with your active domain controllers, both in Exchange and most likely several other applications as well.
Yeah, so that's the hard part. It's a coordinating task basically. If you look at each technology from a recovery perspective, it's pretty straightforward. But at least for me as a AD guy, I will not be able to restore dynamics, for example. I probably can't do Exchange or link either. There are some really good best practices for recovering your AD forest, and I've done it and it works, but you really need to know what's in this forest from an application perspective. That's the hardest part. So you saw, you probably have a lot of backups. So one of the things that I think is really time consuming and really hard is to find out which backup should I use. The old way was to reinstall a backup on a server that is sandboxed, take a look at it, Does it feel right? Is it okay? No exact science behind it. So DSA main is a tool from Microsoft, which you have already. Just write DSA main in a command prompt. That actually works with backups and snapshots. So you actually mount a backup, and you can use LDP, for example. That's what I use. And then I go in and manually compare differences, just like you would do if you brought a backup back to a separate box, and then you start comparing by looking at ADOC, sites and services, and so on. The bad thing, if you use an LDAP equivalent of LDP, for example, is you can't restore from that tool. So basically what you do is, okay, I see I need to fix a simple thing, as I need to fix the group membership of this user. So you load up DSA main, you can look at it, and you see, oh, you're part of these groups, but they are also gone, so you need to do an authoritative restore, and I will tell you what that means. And it takes time. It's time consuming. So a friend of mine, Alexander, wrote a tool called AD Restore. It's recently gone to beta, and it's free. It's 100% PowerShell, and it will do everything like above, but it will restore as well. So I want to show you that tool. It was actually put on Codeplex 30th of December, so it's pretty new. It's still a beta. It's really long. So let's say I have a user, Lena, and I look at her I get a call. She doesn't get email, and something is really wrong. So I start looking at her and say, that's the wrong email address. That's wrong. And I know she was a member of a couple of groups. So now I can go back at my backups, and in real life they were probably a member of 50, 60 groups, or even hundreds of groups. And I use the backup, and I see, okay, now I have a list of groups, so you need to add them, but the groups are also gone and so on. It will take me a lot of time. So what I do with Magic Restore is, so I go in, I load my snapshot, I say which naming context to look at. I will search for, in this case, name, Lena Paprocki. I think that was the name, yeah. I then compare them. So in my snapshot, I did a normal regular AD snapshot from entities util. That's nothing new. So I see these are the attributes that is actually changed. Can you see it on the screen, or is it too small? Someone's typing. Okay, good. So I see the home phone is changed. In my snapshot, which is source, it's 907-385-4412. And currently it's 123, homepage, Felt's printing services, something.se. Oh, different mail. The mobile is wrong. And we can take a look. Yes, it is wrong. So what I can do now, I can restore everything if I want. So let's do that. It will tell me which attribute are restored. Perfect. But I also suspected group memberships. So compared to my snapshot, she was also a member of these groups. So I can select one or all of them. And remember, this is a beta version 1.0, so success. So if I go now and look at, exit, Lena Paprocki, have the correct mail, feltsprintingservices.com. Phone numbers is okay. And just to give you an example how fast this would be, we can just, let's try it. Oh, sorry. Let's see. So whatever you change, it will be different. And if you take a snapshot, it's really easy. Let's see if I can do. There's nothing. This is. If I right click and the only thing I get the restore membership, and I click on it, it says everything is fine. So let's find me and try to do something. Yes. This is how fast it is. So other programs that are used, they actually load it up in memory, and if you do like I did now live, they will never find out that the mail was changed, so we restore that. Memberships, restore that. And let's see. And there you go. So this is a really nice PowerShell software actually. And you get the source code and everything from Codeplex. I like it. I've played around with it now for a couple of days, and I've never seen something that's this fast. Not even some other popular stuff. I'm not going to mention their names, but you got me. So that's a useful tool. So download that and start playing around with it. So non-authoritative restore. Non-authoritative restore is the default method when performing a restore of AD, and are used in majority of restore situations. So using the backup tool, there are a number of different situations where restoring of AD may be necessary. In some cases, the domain controller may have failed due to an operating system or hardware failure. In other cases, well, the actual domain controller stopped responder or AD become corrupt. They are slightly different in each situation. To restore AD to failed domain controller, the failure has probably happened due to OS or hardware failure. Now the entire computer needs to be rebuilt, complete with operating system Active Directory. To restore AD to the domain controller where AD has failed, in this case, the server itself hasn't failed, it's just AD. So this situation does not require reinstallation of the OS, instead it requires to restore the system state from previous backup of the domain controller in question. This will ensure that AD is returned to a stable and functioning state. AD cannot be restored to a computer in which AD is running. In order to complete the process, the computer must be placed into directory service restore mode. In directory services restore mode, the operating system is running but AD is offline. After the restore process is completed, restart of the DC is needed. And after restart, it should now be functioning properly, because once restarted, the DC should reinsert itself into the application topology and receive any updates. Yes, there are some advanced restore options you can change, and for some of the components. To change the default restore location, you need to click Advanced, for example. You can tell where to restore the data. And because the backup tool restores the database on register settings when it restores AD, the IP configuration is also restored. Additionally, the DNS and if you have certificate server database files and file FRS are restored. Completing restore has the following results. FRS service is reset so that it is in a state ready for replication from a partner. AD database is verified for restore. The server then restarts into normal operation mode and performs the following action. It checks the AD database file for consistency and then it re-indexes them. It replicates data with an FRS or DFSR replication partner. It restores the cert service database. The other thing is distributed service dependencies and non-authoritative restore. So since AD is interlaced with other distributed services such as certificates, FRS, DFS, system registry, etc., because of the dependencies that distributed services have on one another, restoring AD is not an isolated operation. For example, AD relies on the policies container for associating policies with domain organization and units. Unless all dependent services are restored in the same mode and from the same backup media, inconsistencies might result. So, implications. Since it's a multi-master update model in which objects can be created or modified at any domain controller in a domain, these object creations and modifications are then replicated to all DCs concerned using the AD replication topology. As the database contents and changes are replicated between DCs, the AD database GUID, DSR-DB GUID, invocation ID, is used as a core part of the replication process. The DSR-DB GUID represents the instance of an AD given on a given domain controller. If this GUID in conjunction with the appropriate USN that is used when the requesting AD updates from another domain controller. Some interesting process takes place when a DC fails and needs to be restored from backup. When a DC reboots after the restore is completed, the domain controller has to determine where to start the USN sequence. If it reuses an existing USN, a serious replication problem will happen, trust me. In order to mitigate the risk, the AD database GUID or invocation ID is changed on the restore domain controller as part of the restore process. Basically, what it means is that the restore domain controller appears as a new replication party to other domain controller. The other big thing is Sysvol, and I will talk about Sysvol separately in the coming slides. So, authoritative restore. The primary purpose of an authoritative restore is to reinstate objects which have been deleted. So we use the backup tool. Well, if it recently been deleted, I can of course use recycle bin, but let's say we don't have recycle bin. So I use the backup tool, and I first perform a non-authoritative restore. Then I go into entities util, and then I use authoritative restore and reinstate the deleted object or objects. It is not possible to use non-authoritative restore process to reinstate deleted objects from an older backup image because the backup media that was used to conduct the restore would contain an image of AD that was created before the object was deleted. So the authoritative restore process works as follows. First, the domain controller is rebooted into directory service restore mode. A non-authoritative restore of the AD is performed from backup media. After this has been done, and before the domain controller is restarted, the authoritative restore procedure is used to reinstate the required object. So this process actually alters the object metadata so that it will win any replication collision that may occur. By default, and I still think it's true, I haven't looked at the source code in a while, it's increased by 100,000. So this action actually marks the object as authoritative and reinstates them in Active Directory. The authoritative restore action is done using entities util, and the authoritative restore process do not affect objects that were created after the backup you are using was created. When other domain controllers exist and an authoritative restore is performed, any objects that were created in a directory partition after the backup remain in AD. So an example of this would be I back up the system on Monday. I create a new user called Lasse Pettersson on Tuesday. It is replicated to all domain controllers in the domain. On Wednesday, another user account, Ståle Hansen, is accidentally deleted. To authoritatively restore Ståle Hansen without re-entering information, the domain controller can be restored with a backup created on Monday. Then I use entities util, mark Ståle Hansen user account as authoritative. The result is that Ståle Hansen is restored without any effect on Lasse Pettersson. You have the same implication and effects on authoritative restore as you have a non-authority. Sysvol is a big thing. I will show you why. The other thing is, if you do an authority restore, it will have an impact on group membership. Because the group membership attribute is different from most other attributes in AD, because it's a linked attribute. So each of these attributes point to a group membership list, which is maintained as a multi-value attribute in a different area of the database. Whenever a group membership is modified, AD updates the links and backlinks to the necessary objects in the background. So due to the nature of group membership and the way AD replicates data, it is possible to lose group membership information as the result of the authoritative restore process. And this is because it depends which object is replicated first after the authoritative restore takes place. So the way AD replication works, there's no way to define which object should replicate first in the authoritative restore process. So if you're affected by this behavior, it's best to perform two separate authoritative restore operations. First, you perform an authoritative restore procedure and restore the required accounts. After this has completed, reboot the domain controller, replicate all the changes, perform another authoritative restore exercise, and this time you take back the groups and let it replicate, and you should be fine. The other thing, it also has an impact on trust relationships and network connections. You might need to go in and change your password on your trusts and on your computers. So restore Sysvol 3. I said that this is special and it affects both non-authoritative and authoritative restores. So we have two different things and two different ways of doing it. In NTFRS, there's a register change that needs to be done. In DFSR, you use add-edit. So how to rebuild the copy of Sysvol? So in NTFRS, you have the BUR flags registry value. D4 means it's authority restore, which means FRS treats the files and folder on its local copy of the Sysvol tree as authoritative for the replica set. And only one member of the FRS replica set should be initialized with the D4 setting. Think of D4 as setting as rebuilding FRS part of the first domain controller in a new domain. D2, which means non-authoritative restore, the FRS performs a full synchronization of files and folders from a direct transfer partner that is hosting an authoritative copy. You can think of D2 setting as rebuilding the FRS part of the replica domain controller as if the domain controller were new. So D4, that's your first domain controller in the forest. D2 is the next or the second domain controller. So in the case of a fail, well, let me summarize later. DFSR, so authoritative restore, the equivalent is you set the MSDFSR options to 1 on the good DC and MSDFSR enabled to false on all other DCs, including the good one. You force replication because this you do in AD, so you make sure the replication is done everywhere. And FSR registries, you have to do it on every DC as well. You start a DFSR service on the good DC and then set the MSDFSR enable to true. You run DFSR diag pull AD on the good DC. You set MSDFSR enable to true on the rest of the DCs. You run DFSR diag pull AD on the rest of the DCs. If you do a non-authoritative restore equivalent to D2, on the bad DC you set MSDFSR enable to false. You force replication. You run DFSR diag pull AD, set MSDFSR enable to true. Then you run DFSR diag pull AD again. So what I would do when I see these kind of things is set one DC, preferably PDC Emulator, to D4, the rest of the DCs to D2, or in DFSR case, DFSR options to 1 on the PDC Emulator, MSDFSR enabled to false, and then true on the rest of them, and then I just do it, no problems. The last thing I'm going to talk about is Hypervisor Snapshots. Gen ID, or VM generation ID, that is something new from 2012. So basically the purpose was to prevent the misuse of hypervisor snapshots. And hypervisor snapshot is not the same as the snapshot I do from NTD's util. This is actually taking a snapshot of the whole machine. And when you do that, you get USN rollbacks and lingering objects. This is a bad thing. So what Microsoft did is they created a VM generation ID, which is a random 128-bit identifier, and it comes with 2012, and it's placed in RAM on each virtual machine. Every VM gets its own VM gen ID for the platform. The virtualization platform keeps the gen ID the same for a VM unless the VM is reverted back to snapshots. A virtual DC running 2012 or later reads this value when it starts and before every write to the AD database. It stores the value of gen ID in the MSDS generation ID attribute of its object in the local AD database. So for every write, the AD service compares the gen ID in RAM with the MSDS generation ID attribute in AD database. If they match, no problem, go ahead. If they don't match, the DC has either been reverted to a previous snapshot or the virtual disk of the domain controller has been reused for a different domain controller. In the case of a snapshot, the invocation ID is renamed, same as an authoritative restore, non-authoritative restore, and the read pool block in use is discarded. This effectively designates the domain controller as a new replication partner for other domain controllers, so they replicate in necessary changes to avoid USN rollbacks and lingering objects. So, in reality, we do a restore. That's how it works. And I think I'm actually a few minutes overdue. Thank you for listening. Any questions? I really urge you to take a look at the software I showed you. It's really, really good. Yeah, and I see Lasse has posted some links. Take a look at them as well. They're really, you really need to know this, or at least remember that they are there, and then you call Lasse and he will find it for you, like he did in my case today. Thank you, Lasse, for your help, and thank you everybody for listening. And next is Lasse in 30 minutes, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you so much. Bye.